there. There is no vase there, but it wants to tell you that. And that's the reason you need to be really careful about what you are absolutely positive about. Because we argue about things this ridiculous. Someone will say, of course there's a vase there. What are you, blind? And someone else will go, of course there's no vase there. That's a cutout just against a background. No, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. Now, this is the figure that was used to create that. What do you see first when you look at this figure? You do see the vase. Many people see the vase first. Who saw the vase first on the second figure? All right. Now, can you still see the profiles? However, they don't jump out at you like they do in this one. But yes, many brains will flip them back and forth and back and forth. And usually they're individuals who have an energy advantage in the right frontal lobe behind your right eye, because there's no language there. There's just pictures and gestures. I won't demonstrate any. And there's a sense of humor. There's innovation, and almost all the sciences are loaded in this right frontal lobe. All right. So I like to start with this slide because we are all more alike than we are different, because we're members of the same species. Although I really had fun with that in Birmingham not long ago. So I'm in Birmingham and I'm speaking at this big church Sunday morning. I'm the only person there who has no pigment whatsoever in their skin. I mean, I stand out like a beacon, which is fine with me, because guess what? I know our brains are the same color. It matters not our skin color. Your brain is about the size of your two fists. Now imagine that you have a gray glove on your left hand and a white glove on your right hand. And that's the color of brains, period. You have a white glove on the right hand because in the right hemisphere you have more of those long projections from the neuron called the axon that are wrapped with myelin. And myelin is a very whitish color. So this really cute young man came up to talk to me at the break, and he says, Dr. Taylor, we're not the same color. I looked at him, I said, oh, you're right. He says, so what color is my brain? Your left hemisphere is gray and your right hemisphere is white. What color is your brain? My left hemisphere is gray, my right hemisphere is white. He says, can't be. He says, we have different color skin. And I said, it's irrelevant. Has nothing to do with brain color. And we had lots of fun with that. And I think if we could get that, we really wouldn't worry so much about skin color. And the thing is that I don't even see skin color often unless it's brought to my attention, because I'm so interested in the brain. And when I'm talking to somebody, I'm looking at their brain. What is their brain doing? You know, how is it helping them talk? What are the behaviors that are coming out of their brain? And it's really fun. And if you start paying attention to that, you'll have a lot of fun. All right, so we know that our brains are more alike than they are different, period. I was also in Birmingham and I made that statement, and somebody in the audience said, well, most of us are. And I thought, I wonder who that person knows. We all are more alike than we are different. But like fingerprints, there's no two brains that are identical, not even the brains of so-called identical twins. And what do we know about that from brain scan studies? Well, we know that each brain has a unique configuration, meaning you might be looking at the front the frontal left lobe that contains Broca's area that allows us to speak words aloud. Well, you do PET scans on 100 people, and they've all got Broca's area right up there. But it's not in the same place in any of the 100 brains. It's just in a slightly different location. We've all got it, but it's slightly different. The brains, each brain solves problems differently, certainly based on which of the 4 chunks has their energy advantage. When you do PET scans, positron emission tomography, and you ask brains, pull up a picture of the face of your mother. And now you watch in the different brains what part of the brain lights up when those neurons start to work. And pretty much it'll light up in the right frontal lobe, which is where you do internal mental picturing. But again, that picture will activate cells in slightly different regions throughout that whole chunk. And we get more alike as we get older, right or wrong? Well, I'm not talking about you and Charles. Brains actually become more dissimilar in function as they get older, because every thought you think changes the structure of your brain, and nobody ever thinks identical thoughts. So sometimes young people say to me, well, old people are all alike, and I go, they're far more different than you are with your group of friends, because they've got lots of years to think different thoughts. So here is a cutaway of the brain that is actually a real brain that we made a resin brain out of it, and then we just slapped that half down on a scanner. And so this is what you'd see if you really were looking at a brain that was cut in half. You would see the brain stem here that connects with the spinal column all the way down your back. You'd see the cerebellum right here. That's the part of the brain that turns abstract thought into action. So I'm talking to you, but I'm thinking, I want to move so I see the screen. You don't know I'm thinking that, and I haven't said that, but my brain picked that thought up. And immediately the cerebellum begins to move my joints and muscles to do what my thought was. And if you have a stroke in your cerebellum, you may think the thought, but you may not be able to carry it out smoothly. So somebody would say, I want a glass of water. And the cerebellum, because it's damaged, would maybe reach for the glass of water and knock it over, or completely miss it, or pick it up and drop it, because this is just a fabulous part of the brain, and we use it for any motor program habit that's been loaded. When you learn to play the piano, when you learn to play another instrument, all of that is loaded in the cerebellum, and you give it a thought and it absolutely just starts making your muscles and joints work to do what it is you want it to do. It's phenomenal. You would see this little part in the middle. See that curved, creamy color part? That's the corpus callosum. That's the largest bridge of the 3 or 4 that connect the 2 hemispheres. And that is really interesting because until it gets paved, think of it as a gravel road. How easy it is, how do you like to drive on a gravel road versus a paved road? Skidding around, not as smooth, can't go as quickly, unpredictable, maybe deeper potholes. It takes till about age 19 or 20 to get that huge highway paved. And by paving, you can think of it as asphalt, the brain's asphalt, or you can think of it as fiber optics. It's wrapping all of those long axons on the neurons with insulation that lets the information go between neurons at lightning fast speed, 200 miles per second. And then you see this outer part, the rind on the watermelon, if you will, and that's called the neocortex or gray matter or cerebrum or thinking brain, lots of words for it. And when I draw this out, this is just that top layer. And you can see the fissure down the middle. That's what gives you the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. You can see there's a fissure in each side of the brain, and there's your 4 chunks. And you may be interested to know that pretty much all of the sensory systems are decoded up in that 3rd layer. So you'll have 2 occipital lobes to decode what you take in through your eyes. You'll have 2 temporal lobes to decode what you take in through sound. And you'll have 2 parietal lobes to decode what you taste and the temperature in the room and how your muscles are working and so on and so forth. It does not decode odors. Odors are decoded up here in that middle subconscious layer, which is the same part of the brain where you have long-term memory. So when you smell an odor and you have a good memory associated with it or a bad memory associated with it. I was over in the Philippines, and I wish I remembered the name of the fruit, but there's a fruit that smells so bad that I could not get it near my nose. It's just the most disgusting smell I've ever heard or smelled. I'm auditory. Now, if I pinched my nose closed and took a bite of it and got it in my mouth and then opened my nose, it tastes wonderful and I didn't smell it. But I could not even get it close to me until I did that. So the left hemisphere makes inferences, and that's good and that's bad. Meaning that it'll get a little piece of information and it wants to jump to conclusions. And you need to rein that in. Because sometimes it's correct and sometimes it's not correct. You need a little bit more information before you jump to a conclusion. The right hemisphere is very it's interested in what's happening right now. It's interested in the big picture and how I get from here to there. But it's better at making judgments because it tends not to jump to conclusions. It tends to want to look at the big picture and then come to a conclusion. So this is how the 2 hemispheres work together. If you're in a situation that's dangerous, that left hemisphere is going to go, do something right now. The right hemisphere is going to look around and it's going to go down. It's going to send a message down to the brain stem saying you better activate one of the stress responses: fight, flight, tend, befriend, conserve, withdraw. So they do work together, but there's a slight difference in the way they function. So as I mentioned, here's Brocau's area up here. And every brain that's been studied so far has a Brocau's area. But sometimes it's right here, and sometimes it's here, and sometimes it's there, and it's over there or there. It's in a slightly different place. So it's very individual. So that's the brain fact for this piece of information. So what's the practical application? What's the takeaway? Because if you don't apply it, what good is a fact? So the takeaway is, because every brain is different, stop expecting any brain on the planet, number one, to be like yours or even to understand yours. Because you don't even understand your own brain. If you did, you'd be consistently successful, because the success secrets are all loaded in your brain. You just need to access them. So stop, as Paul says, with the meaningless argument and foolish controversy. It's just one brain's opinion arguing with another brain's opinion, and it's so completely unmitigatedly dysfunctional. You did not find Christ arguing. The good news is the more you understand about brain function, the more options you have in exhibiting your own behaviors. And that's what life is all about, the behaviors you exhibit. A couple things about the corpus callosum. There's a difference between the size of the corpus callosum in the male brain and the female brain. In the male brain, see, this would be a drawing of the corpus callosum in a female brain. Lots of fibers. Fibers are of larger diameter, which means in the female brain, if any part of it is on, it's all on. 5-lane highway. The male brain, look at this one little bar in the middle. That's about the size of the corpus callosum in the male brain. Not good or bad, but it is different. Because it's got fewer fibers of smaller diameter, the beauty of the male brain actually is that it's like two separate brains operating in their heads. Takes less energy for the male brain to run. Because if they're in this side, the left hemisphere is idling. And if they're in the left hemisphere, the right hemisphere is idling. Takes more energy to run the female brain because it's all on at the same time. So this is where males and females get in trouble. Because let's say that he's in the right hemisphere. Lights are off in the left hemisphere, AC is turned down, nothing's happening over there. She wants him with his frontal left lobe to come and hang a picture. So she'll say, "Hon, can you come and hang this picture for me?" Okay, he's nowhere near that part of the brain. And he'll say, "Well, in a minute. No, I want you to do it now." And he'll go, "Well, as soon as I finish this, I'll come." "Well, why can't you come now?" Now, in order for him to come now, this is what he has to do. First, he's got to turn off the AC. Then he's got to turn off the lights. And then he's got to take the journey over this little minuscule 1-lane road. As soon as he gets here, now he's got to turn on the lights. Now he's got to turn on the AC. Now he goes up here to wherever he needs to be to pound in the nail. And that takes time. Maybe as much as 7 seconds. So of course he doesn't want to do that till he's done over here. And women who don't get that put a lot of pressure on their male partners. Who lives longer, males or females? Duh. We're stressing their poor little brains. So what's the solution? Get a list and say to him, whenever you happen to get in this side of the brain, I'd like you to hang the picture and I'd like you to blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And then guys, don't milk that. Get in that side of the brain and do it. But asking him to do it this second is really unenlightened. So have you ever watched a talk show where they ask questions and there's two lineup of people and they each have a little button in front of them and they're supposed to, as soon as they know the answer, they whack the button? Well, this one has nothing to do with gender, but people who are slow at naming something, meaning pulling up a label for something, tend to use one of these highways more than the others. People who are fast at naming something tend to use a totally different part of that highway. So I've watched people in school, especially if there's a spelling bee or, teacher wants you to put your hand up when you know the answer, and somebody will have their hand up right away and other kids are trying to find the label, and then they get their hand up. And the people who do it quickly often look around and think they're so much better than the other people, and they'll say, how come you're so slow? It's a different type of intelligence, and they use different pathways. And the problem is you only know your own brain. And if you're a fast namer, you're tempted to think slow namers are just flaming idiots. And if you're a slow namer, you might think, I wonder if there's something wrong with my brain. No, it's a different type of intelligence. So learn what your brain does and go with it. Are we freezing up again?
Is it appropriate to ask a question?
No, it advanced. No, go ahead.
How, in dealing with your children, what if you have one that's just on fire and the other one that's just as intelligent, but much slower?
Different kind of brains, and the way I often describe that is that the one who takes a little longer may actually end up being the more successful problem solver, because they're taking a little bit longer to pull up the information and think about it. But the person who thinks quickly will probably do better. Let's say they took nursing or some branch of medicine. They probably are going to do better in an emergency department, because here comes the patient and you've got 3 seconds to do something. And the very fast thinker will immediately do something. Once their life has been stabilized, it might be the slower namer that's actually able to sit down and ponder and take the time to come up with an amazing diagnosis.
Do your teenagers understand that if you explain it to them just like you explained it?
5-year-olds can understand it. They may not know about the emergency department, but well, you teach them that every brain is different, and you only know your own brain. And bullying is completely learned behavior. So if you learned it, you can unlearn it. Child that's being bullied, you want to do something about that, because there's lots of interesting research. Children who grew up being subjected to bullying behaviors in adulthood have a very much higher risk of becoming obese, developing health problems, and dying younger. So it's not okay to let that go. So brain maturation, you know, the brain matures from the back to the front. So the corpus callosum is not paved till usually somewhere around 20 or 21. So until that happens, that brain is always at risk of hitting a pothole and shorting out. And we tend to not realize that. And adults can put a tremendous amount of pressure on kids for certain types of behaviors before their brains are really able to exhibit them. That doesn't mean you don't start developing good habits and explaining this and training them, but until that road is paved, it is not paved. And it takes time. Now that's the good news. The prefrontal cortex, right up here behind the forehead, remember where we talked this morning about working memory? That's not done till mid to late 20s. And people all over the world make life impactful decisions before their prefrontal cortex is done, because they don't know this. And since everything we hear, read, think, say to ourselves turns into pictures in the brain, you want to be really careful to only always speak positively, so that the first picture the brain creates is the one that it follows. For example, this is not a blame example. However, from the time I could remember, my parents said to me, Look for the picture in your head. Don't get married until you graduate. Okay, there's two pictures there. Do you see the two pictures in your head? Which one is first? Getting married is first. And then graduation. You see, in our language, don't is supposed to tell you what I'm about to say is not what I want you to do. Very, very poor way of communicating. So I got married before I graduated. Those were the pictures I saw my whole life. And my parents were unamused. Now, had they said to me, Arlene, graduate before you get married, now what's the sequence of pictures? Absolutely. I would have had an 85% increased risk of graduating before I got married. Nothing seems to be 100%, but 85 is pretty good odds. So these prefrontal part, you know, as a preacher's kid, I think I was probably a little more judgmental as a child than I am now, thank the good Lord. I remember sitting there in church one time thinking, I don't know how come Christ waited till he was 30 to start on his mission. If he'd just gotten on the ball and started when he was 21, look what he could have done. That left brain again, jumping to conclusions. And then I learned that this prefrontal cortex, not done till mid to late 20s. You know, 27, 28, 29, 30, and I've met 40 and 50-year-olds who don't have it done yet. So with the kind of temptations Christ had to deal with, of course he wouldn't start till he was 30. Let's get that brain done so you've got the full access to especially that prefrontal cortex that is what distinguishes us from mammals, from other mammals. Planning, thinking ahead, choosing, conscience, willpower, morality, prejudice or no prejudice, and on and on and on. And then, after we know all about that, there can be 2 to 3 years difference in the maturation levels among brains. So as a school nurse, I'd walk into a room and here's 31 7-year-olds. No, the teacher did not have 31 7-year-olds in terms of brain maturation. The teacher had 31 children whose brain maturation probably ranged somewhere between 5.5 and 8.5. And they're going to progress at different rates. And again, we have this expectation that all brains are the same and all brains are going to get A+ on every subject. It's ridiculous. And it's really lethal if you got twins and they're boy and a girl, because the little boy brain is born with the right hemisphere more developed. The little girl brain is born with the left hemisphere more developed, and up until middle school, we only pretty much teach to the left hemisphere. Reading and writing and arithmetic, left brain subjects. So here's this little kid, and his sister's pulling A's and he's pulling D's, and everybody's telling him, how come you're so stupid? And there's a good chance he'll drop out before he even gets to high school because he thinks he's dumb. Instead of helping him understand that this is hard for your brain right now because your right hemisphere is developed, but you just wait till you get to right brain classes in high school and you're going to fly. And we don't. We just punish him for not getting as good a grade as his sister. The male brain probably takes almost 1.5 years or slightly more to mature at the same level as the female brain, not because it's stupid, But because it has to go through an entirely different chemical bath to move it from a default position into the quintessential systemizing male brain, which is the reason statistically most marriages between males and females, who's older, the man or the woman? Usually the male, and the average is about 2.1 years. Because we tend to partner with people at our level of brain function, maybe within 15 IQ points, certainly at a level of emotional intelligence. And since it takes the male brain a little bit longer, it's no surprise that the female brain looks for a brain that's done at their level, even though that's a little bit older. So every thought you think changes the structure of your brain and turns into a picture. And we already mentioned that positives are a one-step process. That's why they're the programming language of the brain. Negatives are a two-step process. So, work by Dr. Daniel Wegner says this: when I say this phrase to you, what goes into your working memory? Don't think about the white bear. What do you see? The white bear. But what did I tell you not to do? Think about the white bear. And what are you going to be thinking about? The white bear. There's no way you can think about the white bear, because whatever you say immediately turns into a picture. That's the problem with negative instruction, and that's unfortunately the bulk of instruction that kids get in our country. A negative instruction tells you what not to do, which guarantees you'll do it. It doesn't tell you what to do. So I was talking to a bunch of freshmen at university, and I said to them, so don't think about the white bear. And of course they start laughing. And I said, so one of them he started doing my work for me. He says, well, Dr. Taylor, what do you want me to think about? I said, good question. What do you think that I want you to think about? He goes, I don't know. Do you want me to think about a brown bear? Or do you want me to think about a skunk? I said, you're right. I haven't told you what to do, only what not to do. And that's why it's so lethal to behaviors. So if I say to you, don't touch the stove, what's the first picture? Touching the stove. So the 3-year-old touches the stove, and now what do we do to the 3-year-old? Punish him. And whose problem is it? Yours. You didn't give him proper instruction. If you want that kid not to touch the stove, what would be a much better phrase to use? Stay away from the stove. Keep your hand away from the stove. Can you see the difference in pictures between don't touch the stove and keep your hand away from the stove? Only give yourself and others positive instructions. Here are what we call the 3 layers of the brain. And they pretty much follow this. All I did actually was take a picture of this, cut out the different layers, and pull them apart so you can see them. So the first layer, there's the brainstem and cerebellum. And that little teeny middle layer, but extremely powerful. And then that top rind on 2 layers are subconscious completely. And they cannot use language. They do see the picture that language creates. So that's the reason you say to a brain, don't touch the stove. And if the brain especially is not done yet or misses the don't, that's the reason this part of the brain pushes them to touch the stove, because that was the picture it saw. The 3rd layer can process negatives, meaning those of you whose brains are supposedly done, if I say to you, don't touch the stove, you pretty much get it. And you may not touch the stove, or you might say, why? Well, the brain can't answer the question why. All I would be able to say is that people who touch the stove tend to get burned. Take your pick. But it's not an efficient way to talk to even this part of the brain. Because if the brain is stressed or thinking about something else, it'll miss the don't. And it'll do exactly what you didn't want it to do. On the news the other day in California, it was really interesting. The fire department was called to a house because it was burning. And when they got there, the 9-year-old boy was there all alone. Unfortunately, he got out. And he said his parents were somewhere, and they called him, and they came back. And his parents drove in, and they saw the house on fire, and his mother gets out of the car and starts screaming like a banshee and saying, whatever a banshee is, and starts saying, I told you, don't play with matches and set the house on fire. What was the picture in the kid's brain? Absolutely. So they talked to the kid, and they said, were you playing with matches? He says, yeah, I was. He says, I never thought about matches until my mom said something to me about them when she left. If I told that kid once, I said it 1,000,000 times. Don't stand near the edge. And that's how we lose a lot of kids. Because we spend a lifetime telling them don't, instead of telling them what to do. So always tell your brain what you want to have happen and stop telling it what you don't, regardless of your age. You speak as if the new behavior is already in place and happening. Pay attention to that. Let's say that you've decided that you're going to stop drinking sodas, diet or regular, because they're both deleterious to the brain. But you say to yourself, don't have a soft drink today. What's the picture? The soft drink. And that is no way to change your behavior, especially an addictive behavior. So I have worked with addictive behaviors for probably at least 50 years, and I doubt there's an addictive behavior I haven't worked with. And it's been an interesting journey trying to teach 12-step groups this new information. Take AA, for example. Worldwide, the 12-step AA program, started by Bill Wilson, has been the most effective in changing behaviors related to alcohol addiction. But if you go to an AA program, what are you supposed to say when you walk into the room? Hi, I'm June. I'm an alcoholic. What's the picture in the brain? Drinking. And I explained to them that that's the picture they're probably going to carry the whole meeting. And so they said, well, what should we say? It's really important to acknowledge that you have a problem. And I said, sure, do it once. Or if you must use the word alcoholic, which I would not use were I running a 12-step program, say, hi, I'm June. I am a recovering alcoholic, and today I drink only water and tomato juice. What's the picture in working memory? Water and tomato juice. You got it. And the people who do that usually are much more quickly successful than the people who don't. You say what you're doing even if you haven't started doing it yet. So if you were to say, tomorrow I'm going to start drinking water and tomato juice. The brain is not stupid. The brain will say, okay, that's tomorrow. When tomorrow gets here, if you still want to do it, I'll help you, but I'll bet you anything you won't want to do it tomorrow, because we've been through this before. So you must say, I am drinking water and tomato juice, even if it's something you are starting tomorrow. Because until it's the I am statement, and it's interesting to look up I am in scripture, until it's the I am statement, your brain does not get in gear. Never, ever say anything to your brain that you do not wish to be true. Do you understand what I just said? Because it's going to create a picture. So, for example, you might wake up in the morning and you think you're being cute, and you say, oh boy, I feel another bad day is coming on. Part of your brain will understand that that's sort of a joke. And the first and second subconscious layers will not get the joke, and they will do everything in their power to help you have a bad day, and probably do it very well. And we sabotage ourselves by the pictures we create through our words. A lot of people have trouble understanding what thoughts are. They're just words in your brain that create pictures. There's nothing magical about them, except they're completely magical, because whatever you say is going to be what you get, pretty much. So just pay attention when a thought pops up in your brain, and then you ask yourself, is this a thought I want to keep thinking? Do I want to hang on to that thought? Or do I want to think a different thought because I want a different outcome? And it's hugely powerful. When I first started public speaking, I used to throw up every time in the women's restroom before I started speaking because I was terrified. I felt like I really needed to respond to the request to speak, but I'd always throw up. And, weeks and months went by, and I'm thinking, this is just plain ridiculous. I hate to throw up. So I prayed about it. And the way I pray about some things, got in bed at night, I lie there, close my eyes, and I pull up in my brain a big whiteboard. And I write with my non-dominant hand, which is my left hand, on that whiteboard, and I say something like, tell me the reason I throw up before I speak! Exclamation marks. Okay, then I go to sleep. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 days for my brain to answer that question. And sometimes I've got it in the middle of the night. So in this particular case, when I got it, I dreamed. I dreamed I was standing in front of an audience. And it was like I could see myself there, but at the same time I could see inside my brain. Brain had nothing to do with what I was presenting. It was all about, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I can't remember something? What if somebody doesn't like what I said? It was all about me. It was not about the presentation. And when I got that, I went, oh, for crying out loud. Well, this stops now. And 2 or 3 days later, I was supposed to lecture 1,700 young people in a big high school. So I walked in and I said to myself, you are remembering, you're having a good time, you love to share the information. Some of the kids are actually getting it. Never offered to throw up, and I haven't thrown up since. It's hugely powerful, the pictures that you give your brain to follow. So become aware of your thoughts, because you're doing self-talk every minute you're awake. You may not think you are, but you are. Just sit there at home, close your eyes for a few minutes and say, what's going on in my brain? And you'll hear it. And sometimes you'll hear it in somebody else's voice. For a long, long, long time, I heard my mother's voice say, you're not smart enough to be a doctor. And that wasn't her trying to be ugly. It's just she was the first female in our whole family line back for 5 generations that ever went to college. And so a doctor? I mean, that was way, way beyond that. And it was very hard for me to get rid of that. And the first thing I had to learn to do was whenever I heard that phrase in her voice, I'd reach up and turn the volume down. And let me tell you, that was so satisfying. I just turned her right off. Doesn't mean I don't love her or value what she did for me, but I turned it off. And I never hear that now, unless I'm using it for an example. So you can control your thoughts, which is one of the few things you can control. And you probably can't even control the thought that pops into your brain. If you've gone and watched a scary movie and you get really scary thoughts, okay, that's your problem. You put that into your brain, just like if you go drink alcohol and crash your car, that's your problem. You're going to be held liable in court. You chose to drink, now you're responsible for what you did when you were drunk. But you think of a thought, the minute it comes to conscious awareness, you have 2 choices. Do you keep thinking about it and acting on it? Or do you think a different thought and act on that? And that's where you have free choice. So you think a thought, and it's not one you want to keep thinking about. So I just say to myself, whoops, there goes that unhelpful thought again. I do not even name the thought. Nope, I don't want a picture. And then let's say that your thought is, people don't respect me. Well, then you ask yourself, am I exhibiting behaviors that engender respect? And if you are, then it's not your problem. And what I would change that to say is, I am capable and I'm gaining respect. And you will. So a little bit about brain neurons. They form the basis for IQ. You've probably got 80 to 100 billion, give or take a few billion, in your brain, another billion in your spinal cord. Here's the deal, and you probably know this, that neurons typically do not divide and multiply. So I've got the same neurons that I had in the late 1870s. And what you do to your brain that affects the way those neurons work, you carry with you. And that's the reason I talk to young people about be careful what you do once, because it affects those neurons. They can be damaged for the rest of your life. We think the neurons are arranged in the brain in fields of about 1 million neurons per field. So with 80 billion neurons or so, you got a lot of fields. All the neurons in one field are vibrating at the same frequency. This is starting to get very exciting for some of us brain researchers. And those neurons act as radio transmitters. You know, we talked about neurons and the axons that form the corpus callosum bridge. These neurons act as radio transmitters, and they send out their signal for their frequency, for their field, and they pick up the frequency of other brains. So that when you meet somebody and you instantly like them, probably your brain is picking up frequencies from their brain that match yours, and it feels comfortable. You're on the same wavelength, literally. That doesn't mean you want to bring them home with you. Just because you like them, now you look in the prefrontal cortex and say, is this somebody that I like their behaviors. I like what I've heard about them. I think they'll make a good friend, because within 3 years, you're at high risk for exhibiting the behaviors of the people you hang out with. You've got to be discriminating. Sometimes you meet a person and boy, you don't like them at all. I mean, nothing's happening. I don't want to talk to them anymore. Well, that doesn't mean that they would not end up being somebody you like to work with. It's happened to me often at work. I don't choose the people I work with. Well, I don't even didn't choose my family. I can choose my family of choice, and I do that regularly. But at work, sometimes I've met somebody and I didn't like them. But as I got to know them and work with them, I realized they had brain skills I didn't have, and we ended up making a really good team. I still don't particularly like them. But that's irrelevant. I can work with people I don't like. It's much easier for men to do that than women, however. The most trouble I had working in hospitals was with women in departments who didn't like another woman in the department. And I had to have a really good talk with them. You don't have to take them home and live with them. You just have to work with them. And males seem to be able to do that better. I remember one couple who went to a hospital Christmas party, and he got up from the table and he went over and started schmoozing with a couple of guys, and his wife's looking at me and she's going, I don't get it. Harry can't stand those guys, and look, he's over there shooting the breeze with them. Don't understand it. If it was me, I wouldn't go near their table. So pretty soon he comes back and sits down. He goes, well, that's over with. And she goes, what were you doing talking to them? You don't even like them. He goes, I know, but I got to work with them. And that's pretty healthy. And so we could take a page as females out of that. Now, your heart neurons are a horse of a different color, and please tell me you know your heart is loaded with neurons. Well, you do now. 40,000 is the least that McGill University have counted in one heart. Those neurons look identical to the ones in the brain, eat the same kind of neurotropic food, use the same kind of neurotransmitters, and you do think with your heart. Does that remind you of a scripture? The problem is the heart is a subconscious organ. And you got to give it a little time for what it thinks to get up to the brain, to the conscious layer, so you can figure it out. But you do think with your heart. To the extent that researchers now say that your heart neurons form the basis for emotional intelligence, and that 80% of your success in life is probably due to your level of emotional intelligence, not to your IQ. So take a look at your level of EQ. Here are the 3 cardinal behaviors that you see exhibited in brains that have low levels of emotional intelligence. They jump to conclusions, they take things personally, and they overreact. If you got those 3 things out of your life and raised your EQ, you would be amazed at how successful you would be. Enteric neurons, just a couple things about your gastrointestinal tract, because somebody this morning mentioned that. You probably got 1 million neurons in your GI tract, more than your heart. 90% of all your serotonin is in your GI system. What does serotonin help you do? Has everything to do with mood and sleep and whether or not you are happy and joyful or whether you are depressed. 90% of it's in your gut. 50% of all the dopamine is in your gut. So can you understand anybody with an addictive behavior who's pumping dopamine is getting a whole gastrointestinal hit? It's so powerful that this enteric nervous system has been referred to as a second brain. So you get an upset stomach, you get a headache. You get upset emotions and you don't want to eat, or you get diarrhea, or you get constipation, or you throw up. What do you think I was throwing up with before I spoke? Because my emotions, my fear, were wrecking my GI system. You get too much serotonin, nausea and vomiting. Irritable bowel syndrome is being touted now as likely an enteric neuropathy, meaning that the nerves aren't working right in your GI system. And if you get that squared away, symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome often disappear. Couple communication mysteries and then we'll quit. Do you need to stand up for a couple of minutes, or are you doing all right? You can stand up anyway, you know, but sometimes I have to give you a break to get you to stand up. All right, we don't know how this works, but it's so fascinating. So you can take a person, get one of these swabs, put it inside their mouth, swab the inside of their cheek and get some white blood cells on it, and then you dump it in a test tube. You hook up the test tube to the type of instrumentation that you use when you do an electroencephalogram. So get some of the brain waves. Now you take the person whose white blood cells those are, and you take them far away from the laboratory. The most recent experiment that I found was 25 kilometers, which doubles that. So they've got the person way over here, and they've got the white blood cells hooked up to this machine. Now they say to the donor, the person who owns the white blood cells, I want you to remember a time when you were so angry you could just spit nails. And I want you to try to feel that angry again. And what do you suppose happens to the white blood cells? They are flying all over that test tube. There's this huge reaction. And then they let them calm down, and then they did the same thing with fear. Okay, do you understand that the person who's having the emotions is 25 kilometers or kilometers away, and their white blood cells are reacting to what's going on in their brain and body? And then they said to the donor, now we want you to think of something pleasant, realize that what other people say and do comes out of their brains. It's none of your business to control it, especially adult to adult. Yeah, you want to moderate kids' behavior. But, you know, stop taking it personally. Avoid jumping to conclusions. You know, whatever you do, avoid overreacting. And guess what happens to the white blood cells? They just settle right down and they're so calm. Do you understand that when you allow yourself to hang on to anger or fear or sadness, that first of all, that's what you're doing to the white blood cells in your own body? And therefore we contribute often to our own illness. But what is that? What's happening there? Don't know. Pheromones. I'm sure you're familiar with the word pheromone. Everybody familiar with pheromones? Well, pheromones are those little chemical things that are olfactory, meaning they're probably picked up by pieces in your nose, and they trigger a social response in the same species. Okay, been lots of experiments where they'll take a group of women and put them in an office, and they're all of menstruational age, and they're having their periods different times, you know, throughout the month. But they work with each other for a year. And what happens? Their periods now start synchronizing. And now they're all having their period pretty much at the same time. I told that to I told that to a male manager who was talking about taking all the women and putting them in a big open room. And I said, "You sure you want to do that?" Well, he says, "We could save, having to do little cubicles and stuff." And I said, "Okay, here's the deal. Pheromones." I said, "Give it a year, and every one of those women will be menstruating at the same time, and any who have PMS will be PMSing at the same time. And how is that going to work for you?" "I think we better give them their own office." I said, "Good thinking." So here's a fascinating study they did. They took rats. If someone calls you a rat, that's probably a compliment, because the rat brain is very like the human brain. Very like the human brain. It's got the same identical peptides, a form of neurotransmitters. So rats really don't like snakes. And it's not just rats, but rats don't like snakes. So they took a rat, put it in a cage, gave it everything that a little rat could want to its heart's content. And it was just a happy little rat playing on its little toys. And then they brought in a cobra. And the rat went ballistic. Its teeth started chattering and it was flying all over the cage and squeaking. Obviously didn't like this innate, inborn fear of cobras. So they got the little rat all calmed down. Now they took another rat, put it in room number 2, clear on the other side of the building, put it in a little cage, gave it everything that a rat would like. So here's rat number 1 and rat number 2, and they're playing happily and just think life is great. Rat number 1, they bring the cobra back in. Rat number 1 goes ballistic at the same exact moment. Rat number 2 on the other side of the room goes ballistic. How does rat number 2 know what's happening to rat number 1? We don't know. But they know. So is that pheromones? Don't know. So we talked about that. Oh, this is fascinating to me about babies. They're earlier in our healthcare history. We didn't know that much about how to take care of preemies. So these babies are born too soon and they're put in an incubator and the parents can't come in and see them, and they die. High percentage of them died. So somebody learned about pheromones and decided they wanted to do some experiments with these preemies. They began by understanding that human babies prefer clothing that has their mother's scent on it. And so the first thing they did was they asked mothers to bring in a piece of clothing that they had worn next to their skin, and they put that in with the baby in the preemie in the incubator, and it would calm down, and its blood pressure and its heart rate and everything would smooth out. And so then they started doing other things. They started having the mothers pump their breast milk and bring that in to feed the babies. And then they actually said to the mothers, "We're going to give you a little packet of flannel." And they sewed together several layers of flannel. They started out with them in the shape of a heart. And they said, "We want you to wear this to bed right against your skin. And when you come in tomorrow and bring in your breast milk, I want you to bring in that little piece of flannel." And so the mother would come in and give them a jar of breast milk and give them this little piece of flannel. And they took the flannel and they put it on the little baby's chest or back. Mother wasn't there. And again, heart rate, pulse rate, breathing, everything becomes more calm, steady, regular. Must be picking up pheromones. And that's when they decided, this is nuts. If this will do this much for this baby, let's let the parents come in. And that's when the parents were allowed to come in and put their hands through those little holes in the incubator and touch the baby and eventually take them out and hold them. And the death rate was seriously diminished. Just amazing. Okay, last piece. Electromagnetic energy. Some people get really scared when I talk about electromagnetic energy. Avoid doing that. So electromagnetic energy is a form of radiation energy, and it's very similar to rays of the sun. The neurons throughout your body, not just in your brain, throughout your body, generate electromagnetic energy. So where in your body do you have neurons? Your brain, your heart, your GI system, and lots of other places. You know your solar plexus right here where the ribs join? Did any of you ever get sucker punched in your solar plexus when you were a kid? How'd it feel? Happened to me one time, and it flattened me clear on the floor. And like 3 minutes later, I come to gasping. Your solar plexus is just a huge concentration of neurons, and they don't like to get punched. So all these neurons put out electromagnetic energy. Remember, we talked about they're arranged in fields of 1 million neurons per field in the brain, and they're continually putting out their frequency. This electromagnetic energy leaves your body at the speed of light, and quantum physics says that it's never destroyed, which is the reason that some of the experiments they've done, especially with social workers, work. For example, they'll take 2 people and put them in a room and ask them to get as angry as they can, which I don't really like, but you know, I suppose it helps advance science. So they're screaming at each other and pounding on each other, and then they say, okay, fine, you can leave. Now they bring in the social work class and they say, what happened in this room? And they'll say, I don't know, but it doesn't feel good in here. Because the brain is picking up all that negative electromagnetic energy that was discharged. Have you ever gone to a meeting and sat down and felt uncomfortable, got up and moved to another seat and felt fine? Probably sat down within 3 feet of somebody who was having a bad day, putting out negative energy, and your body doesn't want to be around it. So the heart generates the largest electromagnetic field around the body. You know, you can do a holographic picture of your body and you can see the electromagnetic energy right around it. New Agers call that an aura. And a lot of people get frightened of that name. Electromagnetic energy is not New Age. It's just that New Agers were smart enough to get the research and realize that it is important. So you can see the electromagnetic energy. Now, the electrical energy of the heart, measured by an ECG, is about 60 times greater in amplitude than the brain waves recorded in an electroencephalogram. And some researchers, maybe I got it here. Read this with me. This is from Dr. Roland McCready. The magnetic component of the heart's field, which is around 100 times stronger than that produced by the brain, is not impeded by tissues and can be measured several feet away from the body with superconducting quantum interference device, SQUID-based magnetometer. Sometimes I say that word and sometimes I don't. You get it. So you can measure, not touching the human body, but you can measure especially the strength of the heart's electromagnetic energy, as well as what's put out by the neurons. It forms a field, as I mentioned, around the body. We have equipment right now that can measure it out to about 15 feet. It is strongest within 3 feet. So anybody who's within 3 feet of anybody else in this room is impacting them and they're impacting you. Now, this is a fun experiment that to me talks about the power of this. Take two people. So far, they've only done that, as far as I know, with a married couple or a parent and child. So they'll put one person over there, hook them up with an EEG and electroencephalogram, ECG and an EEG. Person number two, more than 15 feet away, other side of the room. And now they get a brainwave pattern on everybody. And will those patterns be the same? No. And then they'll get a heart pattern. And remember, the amplitude is how many times larger? 60 times larger. And then they'll get a heart pattern on person number two. Will they be the same? No. Now they bring them together and ask them to put an arm around each shoulder or hold hands. And now they watch what happens. Which is stronger, heart, M energy, or brain? All right, so the first thing that happens is in person number one of those patterns is going to synchronize with the other one. How will that work? Which will go where? The heart is stronger, so the brain pattern is going to synchronize with the heart pattern. Same thing happens in person number two. So you've still got two people, but instead of 4 patterns, how many patterns do you have now? 2. Now you give them 2 or 3 minutes, and those 2 heart patterns synchronize. And now you've got 2 people, 1 pattern. It's just amazing. So here's the bottom line. If you're not having a good day, don't touch anybody. Do not touch anybody. Because, I'll rephrase that. If you are having a bad day, keep your hands to yourself. Thank you. Because your negative energy will get transmitted. Children and animals, especially sensitive to M energy. Oh, I learned this when I got a cute little poodle. I always wanted a dog, and my parents thought we were gone too much to have a dog. Don't have one now because I'm gone too much. I got this darling little white poodle. Poodle loved me at the pound. Brought him home. My husband got home from work, fell in love with my husband. As long as he was home, I was chopped liver. If he wasn't there, dog loved me. I began to notice very quickly, however, that this dog knew before he got home what kind of a day he'd had at work. So, about 5:15, usually dog. And if the dog ran to the door to the garage and was sitting there, little tail thumping on the ground going, hey, he'd had a good day, we were going to have a great evening. Dog slunk tail between its legs into the master bedroom and climbed under the bed. I followed it. He'd not had a good day. That dog could pick up that M energy from far away. So we'd hang out together under the bed and have a chat. When the dog crawled out, then I crawled out too. So when you sense negative M energy from another brain, if you have that option, do something to block it. Back up, move to another room, leave, because it's not good for your brain. So quantum physics said it's never destroyed. Now that's an interesting thought. You know, it made me wonder what's going on over in Pakistan and Iraq and Iran and Palestine, and is America putting out such negative M energy that it's going over there and negatively impacting them? I don't know, but that's a scary thought. So the question is, are you putting out positive or negative M energy? And as far as we know, it's only one or the other. And the way you decide is positive thoughts give you positive energy and negative thoughts give you negative energy. And that's the reason I believe when the Apostle Paul tells us what to think about, how many negatives are in the list? None. Not one. Not one. So I would like to tell you that my whole life I've put out positive electromagnetic energy. I'd like to tell you that. But if I did, it would be lying. And lying suppresses immune system function, which I cannot afford. But what I will tell you is that it is my clear intent to only have positive thoughts and only put out positive energy. And it's a little bit like with forgiveness, because it impacts my brain and body first. Now, I do care how it impacts other people, but healthy selfishness says it impacts my brain and body first. And I want to impact it healthfully. And then after that, it's everything else. And where it goes, we don't know. They just believe it is never destroyed. Okay, you got a little bit about the brain? Up and down means yes. Okay, good. Now, I really encourage you to take one new thing you didn't know and start working on it. And when you got that habit developed, take another one and start working on that. And that's what I think ends up being the process of sanctification. With God's help, we are learning a better way to live and how to exhibit better behaviors. And little by little, we're building them into pieces of software so that most of the time we're able to exhibit that. And I think that's the only reason Paul and Silas would be singing in prison with their feet in stocks. And the only reason Paul would be rejoicing, even though he's going down the side of the building in a basket because they're out to kill him. When you get this, you are never, ever at the whim of your environment. You are what your mind chooses to do. All right, thank you so much for coming. Dr. Knapp, do you want to have the last word, or shall I just tell him to go home? Oh, I know it's dangerous.
I just had a thought about all this when you were talking about the electromagnetic energy.
Well, that's scary.
Yeah, it was. It makes you wonder how the Holy Spirit works with us, how the holy angels impact us, and how demons do it, and how prayer works to get the right ones to you. It's fascinating.
You know, that is an excellent thought, because I'm working with a group of researchers right now because we don't think electromagnetic energy is fast enough to account for prayer. Because this goes at the speed of light. But the sun is how many millions of light years away? Okay, we are told in Scripture that your prayer gets up to heaven instantly. Well, researchers think there's a new type of energy that they haven't realized is there before, and they're calling it Akashic energy that's instantaneous. So it's going to be really fun to watch that research and see how that comes out. Or it may be something entirely different.
Well, the other thing, the Holy Spirit's omnipresent. He's everywhere, so he's right there.
And so maybe the Holy Spirit takes it up. I don't know. But it sure does make me look at Scripture in a different way. All right. Thank you for coming. Get yourselves home and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Much more to check it, results. Because when they go dinner, she gets to know. All her lifetime, give up. So many. It's like it helps us already go.
Just a simple question. Did you guys